Okay.
Okay. So tonight I'll be repeating Juan Gallardo's speech on the prison costs, the prison system in California, the cost of the system. My opponent's main claim is that the decision to approach crime by longer prison sentences has substantially increased prison costs in California. My opponent's supporting claims were that, number one, California fights crime by incarcerating as many criminals as possible. Number two, longer prison sentences can cause overcrowding of prisons. And number three, that overcrowding of prisons is very expensive in California. My counterclaim for his first supporting claim is that as many criminals as possible need to be incarcerated to maintain public safety. Juan stated that California fighting crime by incarcerating as many criminals as possible is irresponsible and it costs too much, but criminals should be incarcerated so that their offenses won't be repeated. The point for prison is to protect the public and to punish criminals. It would be irresponsible and unsafe for California to do anything but incarcerate as many prisoners as possible. Juan stated that drug offenders shouldn't be in prison because they need rehab. Well, prison is for people who break the law and are found guilty either by a judge or jury, and if someone has been convicted for drug issues, they've broken the law and need to face the consequences of doing so. Juan also stated that there's a lack of re-education to help keep offenders out of prison once they've already committed crimes, so once they're out, they're more likely to come back. However, upon further research, I found that this is untrue and acceptable. In early 2007, President Bush signed the Second Chance Act. This bill's purpose is to assist ex-offenders in starting new lives by providing them with education while in prison. So, in essence, my counterclaim is that the Second Chance Act gives convicted criminals access to educational, vocational, and rehab programs to help prevent recidivism, which is when someone comes out of prison, if they reoffend, they go back. Juan's second supporting claim stated that longer prison sentences cause overcrowding of prison and that the lack of the three strikes law and the death penalty contribute to this problem. First, I believe it's important to point out Juan's lack of information given about the death penalty. Upon further research, I found that the cost of implementing and utilizing the death penalty would be equally as expensive as convicting someone for life without parole, and therefore I find Juan's claim unacceptable. A little bit of supporting information for this claim that I make is that Dudley Sharp, the director of the Death Penalty Resources for California, stated that the cost of a death penalty case is approximately $2 million, while the expense of a life without parole case in prison is about $1 million for 50 years. Sharp stated that the costs pretty much mirror each other, and that death penalty or not, the burden of prisoners on taxpayers will not be affected. Also, Juan stated that the three strikes law is unnecessary and essentially useless. The three strikes law is if someone commits three serious crimes, they're put in prison for a longer sentence than they would have just for the third crime. So basically, the judge takes into consideration the past offenses that that person has made. My counterclaim is that habitual offender laws are completely necessary because instead of giving someone the opportunity to continually break the law, which they've so perfectly done in the past, the California system keeps public safer by giving those repeated offenders longer sentences. Juan's final claim is that overcrowding of prisons caused a huge increase to the spending budget of California. I believe it's necessary to clarify that overcrowding isn't the issue of cost, it's having many prisoners. Overcrowding is simply the term used to describe a situation where there are too many prisoners for a specific prison, or in other words, not enough space for all the prisoners. Whether there is sufficient room for these prisoners or not, them being in prison is still going to cost the same amount of money annually. Although it's expensive, I find that keeping criminals behind bars is necessary to ensure public safety. Thank you.
All right, you're citing the main and supporting points clearly. You start on the first point, and you kind of accept the premise of the claim that people are being incarcerated, but you're taking a counter position on it, suggesting that this in fact is necessary. What you need is some evidence that shows that high levels of incarceration reduce crime. You're taking it as a presupposition, and I think you need a demonstration of it. Later on in the argument, there's a discussion of 3 strikes, and you do the same kind of thing without providing any proof that it has in fact reduced crime or had a significant impact on the safety of the public. If what we're paying for is the safety of the public, and you can show that the safety of the public has been improved despite these costs, then I think you've got a reasonable argument on that first point. I did like the fact that you had a nice counterclaim on that point, suggesting that there are in fact alternatives, and the notion that it's necessary for people to simply continuously repeat crimes is based on a false assumption, at least based on the one program that you mentioned. Although, again, I think some evidence showing the effectiveness of that program would be helpful. The discussion of the 3 strikes argument, for instance, I think is problematic the same way. It needs some information that shows that it's having an impact. The death penalty argument, I thought it was a little confusing to begin with. If the advocate was arguing that the death penalty would fix the problem, that seems to be almost counterintuitive to the rest of their claim. And then you, in essence, mitigate the argument by suggesting that the costs are relatively equal. So I guess that applies regardless of how confusing the issue is, that it is an answer that tends to minimize some relationship that exists there. Your last point on overcrowding, in separating that from the cost issue, I didn't think that's very clear the way you explained it. I think I know what you're saying here, but you need a much more explicit way of expressing it and giving us a simple comparison, for instance, to show why the cost is basically the same regardless of whether you have 20 people in the jail or 5 people in the jail, why it's not the overcrowding that produces the cost, rather it's the number of prisoners that we have or the amount of crime that's being committed. All right. Thank you.